All right, it's time for us to go ahead and kick off. I'm Kristen Cook, KC with You Bet Firewise. I will be facilitating this evening's workshop for the Wildfire Ready Coalition of Nevada County. Couple housekeeping things. The mute button, if you are not actively speaking, please go ahead and keep that muted so we don't have any background noise. And if you have questions or comments, you can put those in the chat. Joanne or Dario or myself will be monitoring that as we can. We will also have time at the end of the presentation for questions and answers. So as we go along, if we don't address what you're interested in or you have questions, we'll have plenty of time at the end to go through that. As an introduction, this is a kickoff of the Wildfire Ready Coalition's Forest Health Series. And we came to this idea looking at the winter time and what kinds of activities would make sense for us to focus on. And I believe, just real quick, you should have gotten notification that we are recording this, so you need to push OK. Our intention is to make sure we post up a recording of this workshop so that other folks who aren't able to make it tonight can participate in it as well. So please click the OK button that may have just come across your computer for recording. So the Forest Health Series for the Wildfire Ready Coalition currently is kind of a three-part learning session. The first is tonight, kicking off with a tree's eye view, which is in essence a workshop and a primer around what makes a forest healthy. And then we have a series of winter walks, which we'll talk about at the end of this and show you how you can participate in that. But those will be led by forest experts, including Joanne and Dario. And then the last piece is we'll be creating a take-home assessment, a checklist, if you will, that you can use, any resident can use on their own property to kind of implement the things that they've learned through this series. So I think the first question that we get asked is, why does the Forest Health Series even exist? What is it we're trying to accomplish with that? And I do head up the You Bet Firewise community, and I've been doing this for 8 years. And a lot of the questions I get that we hear from whether they're new residents or people who kind of look at their backyards and aren't really sure what to do is, once it comes down to brass tacks, it's sort of hard to understand how to make decisions and choices around whether it's, trimming limbs or which trees are healthier than other trees and things of that nature. So for a Tree's Eye workshop, we thought we'd just sort of start at the very beginning and create a fun way of looking at the forest and looking at our trees so that we can more easily understand it. I am not an expert. I'm not a forester. I've had the good fortune to be exposed to folks like our speakers tonight and learned a little bit. But a lot of what's happening here is also for me because I don't have answers. I still have challenges identifying certain trees in terms of what they are, let alone which ones are best for where they're sitting. So what we're going to start to answer is how each of us can know what your forest is telling you, whether it's one tree or 100 or 1,000 trees. And so for this evening, the workshop is not about actions necessarily. It's about stepping back and observing and kind of getting a handle on when you look at the forest, when you look at the trees, what is it that you're seeing? And starting to recognize the forest conditions that are good and those that are bad. From that, we can build actions. So the structure for tonight is looking at how does the forest and how do the trees express themselves? What are the signs that they're sending that tell us if they're healthy or not? What's the condition of that forest? And we'll spend some time there. And then on a structure, like I said, which trees do I keep and which ones do I eliminate if I'm going to do that? And then that all builds toward actions. So without further ado, I think we in Nevada County are incredibly fortunate to have such dedicated experts like Dario and Joanne. Many of you probably know them. Their backgrounds speak for themselves, but they have a passion and a mission to not only helping Nevada County be a safer place, but also that those of us who are involved in our wildfire learning journey, they help us so much. Dario was our assessor for our Firewise community 8 years ago, and so I like to think he was my first mentor. Joanne intimidated the heck out of me, but we've become pretty close. But I still admire her expertise and rely upon both of them for the content that you're going to see tonight. So, without further ado, Dario, please kick us off.
Thank you, Casey. And it's been a pleasure working with you and showing you what's going on in your forest. So trees expressions equals the forest condition, but trees can't talk, but they can show us signs of their health or problems they're having. But we just need to recognize those signs and how to interpret those. Next. So there's a few terms that we commonly use when we're talking about the forest, and I'm going to go through those. You've probably heard of some of these, but I just want to clarify. So on the top left, crown and canopy. The crown is all the green part of the tree, the branches and the foliage. The canopy is all the crowns put together, the forest canopy. And then next on the right, fuels. Fuels really are anything that'll burn. And when we're talking about wildland vegetation, it can be live or dead vegetation, depending on the conditions. Ladder fuels, you probably all know what that is, but that's just the series of different layers of vegetation that lead from the ground up into the canopy or crown of a tree that carries the fire right on up into the crowns. Understory, we talk about overstory, which are the dominant trees, the ones at the top of the canopy, and the understory is this layer of plants underneath. It can be shrubs, it could be small trees, grass, anything underneath the canopy. Snags, these are standing dead trees. They do have value for wildlife, but they also can be a hazard, fall down on your house or your road or people, and they catch fire readily and they can throw embers a long ways. Litter or duff, also organic matter, there's a number of terms for this, but that's all the material on the ground that collects from falling out of trees and shrubs. It's the decomposing material, and it plays an important role in carrying fire. The ground fuels really carry the fire across the landscape, and the thickness of the litter can drastically affect how much rainfall actually penetrates into the soil. It's like a big sponge. Too much litter, the trees are going to feel some drought stress. So the condition your forest is in is something we're going to look at, and you can see in this picture, there's a whole bunch of different things going on. The trees and shrubs, all the plants show us some signals. You can see there's a variety of different tree types. There's thick forests, there's open forests, there's some dead trees, some dying trees. There's a whole story going on here, and we're going to take a look at that. So go to the next. So plants, all plants, including trees, have three basic needs. They need sunlight to photosynthesize. They need water, primarily from rainfall that gets into the soil, and nutrients that they take up from the soil through the roots. So you can look at trees and you can tell if they're healthy or they're struggling. And trees that are not getting enough sunlight, a lot of times they'll be crooked. Plants try to grow toward the sun. So if a tree is shorter than another one, it's being shaded, it's going to be growing more out toward the sun than the side facing where it's being shaded. They're trying to compensate, and so you'll get these leaning trees or the foliage on one side of the crown and not on the other side. That's a sign of a tree that's light deprived. And if they're not getting enough water, you've seen this in your garden, the plants wilt and you can see trees wilting. They'll also start, if it's long-term lack of water, they'll start to prematurely drop leaves. So you'll see a thinning of the crown. And then if they're missing some nutrients, um, you'll see yellowing of the foliage, thinning of the foliage. Um, they'll be more susceptible to diseases and insects. So there are things that we can do to harm these trees, like compaction and adding fill, trenching, all these things we can do to disturb trees. But for the most part, we can't really help the trees. We can just try not to hurt them. Next. So here's a series of trees from left to right. The healthy, strong tree, everything's going well. It's got a full crown. Sun's getting at it from all around. It's nice and straight, lush. The next one to the right is stress. So like we mentioned, it's dropping some foliage. The color's not quite lush green, more dying branches. It's got a lean to it, so it could be reaching out for sunlight from the neighboring tree. And then the next one on the right is obviously in decline. It looks like a wintertime deciduous tree, but this is a tree that's dying. Something seriously wrong with it. It could be something with the roots or just lack of sunlight. And then on the far right, you see a tree that's recovering. And some trees, if you thin out the forest and give them more light, give them more water by taking away some of their competitors, they can recover. They can fill back in and put on some new growth. So if you're looking at a forest and you see one healthy tree, that doesn't mean you have a healthy forest. You got to look at all of them combined, and that'll tell you which ones are the healthiest and need to stay and which ones need to come out. Next, there's a happy tree. So the healthy, strong trees are, you have a pretty good idea of these. A good example would be all those trees that get cut down and brought into our houses before Christmas time. Those were healthy trees. You see how they were generally they're tall, straight, um, thick foliage, good color, no bends in the trunk. Um, that's a good healthy tree. And you can see that out in the forest. They're generally the taller, bigger trees or the trees growing out in the open. Next. So sometimes trees can suffer from stress, and stress could be lack of water, like in a drought year. There could be diseases affecting them. One of the most common things is uh, they're just crowded, and so they're trying to compensate for that by growing. This one is crooked. It's trying to reach for sunlight. You'll get the thinning crown, uneven growth, branch dieback, and then premature dropping of leaves and, of course, smaller leaves or needles. And then some trees get pushed to the limits and they're suffering badly. And you'll see these trees that have a lot of dead branches. Now, the low branches on a tree should naturally die out from shading from the crown above it. But when you start getting sparse foliage and branch dieback in the upper part of the crown, that's a sign that a tree is seriously declining. And some of these trees never, ever recover. Their next stage would be mortality. You'd have a snag in in that place. And some trees, like I said, if you thin out the neighbors, give them a little more room, some more soil to work with, reduce the shrubs and the leaf litter underneath, they can recover and improve. And what you'll see is some new fresh growth. accelerated growth. The crown will fill out, and you may even see old scars healing over. If there was pitch coming out from its decline, that'll start to fall off and heal over. So those are the trees are telling us what condition they're in. We just need to understand that. So one healthy tree doesn't make a healthy forest. And on the other hand, a few unhealthy trees doesn't mean the whole forest is unhealthy. You just need to identify the healthy ones and remove some of the unhealthy ones. So structure is important with trees. It's the structure of the forest indicates how healthy the forest is. So the next slide, the critical thing for trees in a forest is spacing. So they need room to grow. They need enough resources to support themselves. So overcrowding is our biggest problem. We have far too many trees. And of course, the reason for that is fire used to periodically come through the forest and eliminate all the most of the understory trees and shrubs and kept it thinned out. We don't have that anymore. So we need to just take a look at what we can do to replace fire, either putting fire back in or most of the time removing some trees ahead of time and disposing of the material. So describing spacing can be very complicated. There's a whole bunch of different formulas and methods to measure. Proper spacing really is a function of many different things, like the size of the trees, the soil type, the elevation, or the aspect, and what species they are. So there's a lot of factors there, but we want to simplify it and just give it the sky test. If you can look up and see some sky, you're on the right track. You need some space between the crowns so the trees have some room to grow. Trees can grow in clumps. We don't have orchards out there. These are forests. So you'll see some clumps and then you'll have separations between clumps, and that's good. It doesn't need to be exact, perfect spacing. Not every tree needs to have space between the crowns, but that's the rule of thumb. Look up at the sky. So we've got three different trees on the left, and they're all pretty healthy looking trees. They're different kinds of trees. So, different trees are going to have different requirements for spacing. But if you look at the one at the top, it's a conifer, it looks like a Christmas tree. And then over on the right, this is a common condition that we have is far too many stems, far too many trees crowding each other, and they're in decline. They're not getting enough nutrients, and you can think of it as uh, straws in a drink. So if two people are drinking a milkshake through their own straws, there's plenty of milkshake to satisfy them. But if you put another 5 or 6 straws in there, there's not enough milkshake. Everybody's not going to be satisfied. And that's what we have with our forests. They're all drawing water, nutrients out of the ground. They're reaching for sunlight. So they're all competing, trying to get what they need to be satisfied and be healthy trees. So below that, we have a well-spaced forest. Lots of room between them, not much vegetation growing underneath them. They all look healthy. They're getting sun from above, sun from the sides. That's what we're looking for. But imagine those trees in the bottom right, if they're only like 6 feet tall. Over time, those trees are going to grow taller, they're going to grow wider, they're going to start crowding, and eventually they'll look like the picture right above them. So you need to anticipate the growth of the trees. Now, if they're already large, mature trees, they're not going to increase in size very much at that point. So really, we want to thin early if possible, because smaller trees are easier to thin out. So if you picture how many 5-year-old children you can pack into a VW bug, you could put quite a few of them in there if you pack them in there carefully. But when they grow up to be adults and they're 6 foot tall athletes, you're not going to be able to fit that many in there. So it's the same with trees. They need space. If they get it when they're young and throughout their growing life, they'll be much healthier trees than if they start to crowd up and then you thin them again. Then they have to take some time to readjust to the changing of the conditions you created. So next, this
Okay.
is Joanne.
Yeah, I think this is Joanne, you're up.
Okay, so let's talk about fire in the forest. Next slide, please. This tree's worried because when a fire comes, there's a lot of vegetation around it. So in a forest, we have all these understory fuels and lower branches, and that's just the live shrubs, the live trees, the branches, the litter. And when those catch on fire, they readily take those flames and carry them up into the tree. It kind of is like climbing a ladder. So we have this forest here with a lot of ladder fuels, and that's part of the forest structure, and it'll change how it burns. Next slide. You go to the next slide. Casey's wonderful cartoon trees, which I really like. So this image here is showing how fires start on the ground on the left, and then as they burn, they get to a shrub or a small tree, and they climb up to the top of that, and then that heat there and or the direct flames go up into the crowns of the trees. And we don't want the large trees to burn. One or two once in a while is fine, but it'll start the whole forest on fire. Next slide. Now, this tree's happy because the fire is down low and there are not ladder fuels. This is more what the forest looked like before us European settlers arrived, and there was fires would burn for months on end. Either they started from lightning or indigenous people knew a lot about fire. They practiced it for thousands of years of how to carefully light it at the right time. So here this tree has limbs far up, it doesn't have ladder fuels below it, so it's not a problem to have a fire. In fact, that fire is helping to give nutrients to the trees, because when they burn low and slow like that, they burn up the leaves and the litter and the needles, and it turns to ash that's like throwing fertilizer below the trees. Otherwise, in our dry environment here, Mediterranean environment and climate, it's too hot and dry in the summer for or in the fall for the needles and leaves to decompose naturally with microbes, so they just build up. I'm sure some of you have litter and duff around your trees that's 8 inches or more. Next slide. So what about different types of trees or species and placement? There's not necessarily a good tree or a bad tree, but there are some choices or things to think about with trees and fire, especially when they're near your house. Next slide, please. So we have two main categories of trees. One are the hardwoods on the left, and the other are the conifers on the right. We'll also talk about manzanita. But with hardwood trees, their leaves are flatter, And because they're flatter and often thinner, they don't burn as hot as conifers do. And they often do not have the same oil. So I love the smell of cedar or fir from a Christmas tree. Well, all that wonderful smell are oils, and those oils are very volatile. They catch fire and burn well. So if you're looking at what trees you want to have around your house, and you have a choice between an oak tree or a pine tree, I would choose the oak tree next to my house. It'll still burn, but it won't burn quite as easily, and it won't the foliage won't burn as hot. Now, on the other hand, trees like oaks, they have very resistant bark. So it's like wearing a mitten when you take or a pot holder when you take a pan out of the oven. Their bark is very insulating. So a good reason to have oaks as well is if you do have a fire or you're using fire to maintain your land, they'll survive it. Whereas a madrone and a dogwood, but especially madrone, have thin bark. So they're not going to survive a fire, even if it's a low intensity, if it heats up that bark. So they're good, they're native, they're good to have in the forest. But next to my house, I'd choose an oak. Now over on the right with the conifers, it's not bad to have pines, firs, cedars, junipers, or manzanita in your yard. It's not a bad thing at all. But you just don't want them as close to your house, and you want to make sure that they're more widely spaced than oaks because they'll just catch each other on fire much more readily. And manzanita, a lot of times it's not going to catch on fire, but when it does, I don't know about you, but if I'm doing a barbecue, I like to use manzanita wood if I'm just building it on with my own wood, because it just makes the best coals. It burns very hot. So next slide. Now, the other thing to know about choices with tree spacing and fire in your forest is think about what happens if the crown of a tree or the top of a tree catches on fire. And, in this picture on the left, there's no ladder fuels. And you may say, well, how did it get, burning up in the top? Could have been pitch on the side of the tree. It could have been embers that landed in the tree from some other location. And one tree burning in a forest that has good spacing is fine. It happened naturally. It happens sometimes with professional prescribed burns. Shouldn't happen if you're doing one, but it's not going to catch those other trees on fire very readily. Now, the forest on the right, once it gets up into the crown of one tree, it easily carries from tree to tree. So if you have around your house, you've done an excellent job reducing the litter, the logs, the small trees, the shrubs, the ladder fuels, the lower branches, and you think, I'm set. If a wildfire comes through and embers land, I'm okay. Maybe, because what can happen is if there's a crown fire next to your fire, your forest, it can carry right through the crowns on top of it. Takes a while for it to drop back down on the ground. So give it space so the flames can't go from tree to tree. Next slide. Or clumps of trees. It doesn't have to be individuals. Now, I'm sure most of us live in an area that's not flat, and the slope or how steep it is really changes how fire behaves in a forest or in general. Next slide. What happens when we have a slope is that flames lean with upslope. Fires tend to go upslope more than downslope. And when they lean, those flames are sending hot air ahead of them. They're preheating the trees, the shrubs, the needles ahead of them. Next slide. So CAL FIRE comes, they have requirements for us for defensible space. And they're all based upon this notion that on the left, if it's flat, your spacing can be closer because we don't have the flames leaning unless it's windy. But on the moderate slope in the middle there, you got to increase the spacing because the flames are going to start leaning uphill. So that won't take as much distance for them to hit the crowns. And a very steep slope, you need a lot more spacing. So you have to think about your spacing relative to the slope. Next slide. Now let's talk about different forest types because they're all different. And one of the beautiful things about Nevada County that I really love is that we can take a trip along 49 and Highway 80, and we can go from the west side and start in blue oak woodlands with grass. And then as we climb in elevation and go across the crest, we go through different environments. The temperatures start to get cooler in the summer, the higher you go. And the plants change because of that. It also changes because once you get to the other side of the mountains, there's less moisture there. So we're going to take a little transect here in a minute, looking at what a healthy and unhealthy blue oak woodland looks like, pine oak forest, which is where a lot of us live, or mixed conifer. And then at the highest elevation, upper montane, red fir, subalpine forest, and chaparral. We're not going to talk about that today. And then we get over into the east side around Truckee, and we have east side pine and mixed conifer, and then our beautiful aspen. And then it gets even more open, sagebrush and east side pine. So let's take that journey. Next slide, please. Now these three panels are showing you on the left what a lot of our forests look like now, or they can when they're just left alone. Because we have very good soils in Nevada County and much of the Sierra Nevada, not every inch of it. And so plants grow very well. So if you leave it alone, they're going to just keep growing and getting denser and denser. And it looks normal to us because that's what we're used to seeing. But before any of us showed around and there was this frequent natural fire, it would, like Dario said, kill a lot of the little trees in the understory below the big trees. And so it never got to be a dense forest because some of them would survive and grow up, but not all of them. There weren't as many accumulations of sticks and down logs and litter. So that forest on the left, those trees would be more easily stressed from drought, not necessarily having enough nutrients or light, and they're going to burn really hot. There's just a lot of fuel there, a lot of live vegetation, a lot of dead, and it's all continuous. Now we go to the middle, and this is where a lot of us are. We've been working hard, we're pruning up our limbs, we're getting rid of a lot of the little trees, but we still often have a lot of the surface fuels. If we're just doing the thinning and we're doing some green waste, there's still a lot there. So that's better. That's better. But if a fire were to burn in there, it could still burn hot enough and still go from crown to crown. On the right hand, in a blue oak woodland with grass, it's going to be much more open. It's a savanna, and the grass is going to be shorter. So historically, these would have burned every several years, whether it was from indigenous practices for food and basketry and medicines or to keep their living areas safe. They just would have been more open. Now let's go up a little higher in elevation. Next slide. And we're not covering every vegetation type. There's also chaparral in the foothills and foothill pines, but we're going to go through the main ones. Now, this is where a lot of us live. Lower montane, so it's lower in the mountains, dominated by ponderosa pine and oak. Most often it's black oak. Could be other hardwoods as well. Could be other conifers, but mainly it's oak and ponderosa pine. So the left is what a lot of our forests look like. You can't even see through it. And so, you can thin below and you can reduce some of the fuels, and then you end up with something like the middle panel there, and it looks much better. It's more open, but the crowns still don't have a lot of spacing. Now, it doesn't have to be uniform, like Dario said. It doesn't have to be an orchard. So the one on the right, you could have a few more trees in there, but the one thing that it shows is that there is space between that oak, that hardwood on the left, and then a clump of trees on the right. So it doesn't have to be an orchard. It doesn't have to be quite this open, but you get the idea. And the other thing to notice is there's not an accumulation of logs or tall shrubs under there. There's plants there, but it's more open and maintained. I did a fire history study for my research years ago. And in this forest type, some of the, we can go back and look at scars of the trees, but it shows that sometimes fires burned every 2 years or 5 or 10, very frequently. So it kept it open. Next slide. Now we're going to go up a little higher in elevation. Mixed conifer. And the mixed conifer forest is where you start to get some Douglas fir, more incense cedar. You still have oaks, madrones, different trees, Douglas fir, white fir, ponderosa pine. And that picture on the left is what so many of our forests look like. And I look at it and I just say, it's not providing the habitat it could. It's going to burn so easily, so hot. And if I wanted to hike through that forest, it would be very difficult. If I were a deer trying to walk through that forest, it would be very difficult. So it's just really very crowded. Now, in the middle panel, here it's starting to look better. There's been some pruning, some thinning. There's still surface fuels there, those pile of logs and lots of sticks. The crowns are getting farther apart overall, but some of them are still close enough so that the lower branches are touching, and fire would easily move from the crown of one to the others. Now you look at the one on the right, and it's got a mix of oak and different conifers, and it's got clumps and then some individually spaced trees. So it's got a nice patchwork. It's not an even, orchard look, but it's not going to carry fire through it. So that's what we want to aim for. Next slide. Now, when we get over to the east side, pine and mixed conifer, very similar to the west side, except for that some of the species are different. You'll have different shrubs in the understory, and you won't have quite as many species. You don't usually have cedar, but the same principles and conditions apply. So it's very crowded on the left. It's just been growing, growing, growing. Somebody has gone through in the middle panel and they've done some thinning, but there's still a lot of dead material and taller shrubs on the center panel. And then on the right, the trees are much more widely spaced, and there's a pattern of like a mosaic of open patches, clumps. So the fuels are not continuous in there. The trees have plenty of room to grow, get all the water and nutrients they need. Next slide. There's also, not really the focus of this talk today, but all of that light, there's a lot of native plants that thrive with that as well. Now, aspens are really beautiful. And one of the things is they are most affected by the lack of fire because they sprout back really readily from fire. They sprout from their roots. And without fire, conifers start to grow underneath them, and it just causes this very dense tree type layer, and it shades out the aspen. And aspen are very important for habitat, bird habitat especially. So a lot of treatment's been being done, and there's a lot of different thinning projects that the Tahoe National Forest and others are doing. where they cut out the conifers. So they allow all of the light to get back to the aspens. And that's going to burn a lot less hot too, because we talked about hardwoods and the thinner leaves not burning as hot. But you still have all the fuels on the bottom. Then you get to the right panel and you see it's much more patchy, and there's more wildflowers in the bottom instead of a bunch of down logs and sticks. So that's what we want that to look like. Next slide. And we are, like I said, we're so lucky to have all of this diversity. So you get all the way over on your way, just on the east edges of Truckee, going over to Reno, and then we get to where trees are very widely spaced, and it's more dominated by sagebrush and bitterbrush. And they're affected by lack of fire as well. And the trees are affected by a continuous layer of dense older shrubs. And one of the things that happens with shrubs, either here or over where we live, is when they get old, they get a lot more dead branches, and they're much more flammable. They catch fire and they burn hotter. So once in the middle panel there, the shrubs have been cut back some and pruned, and the trees have been thinned out and pruned some, but there's still more that can be done. And on the right panel, you see it's even a little more open, a little more variable, and more of the shrubs are lower growing and younger. So it just doesn't burn as hot. So this is kind of a tour giving you a look at what a very dense, untreated forest or shrub area would be when we do a little bit or a lot, but not enough. And then on the right, where we want to head. And that pictures on the right, it's not just where we want to be for fire resilience, it's actually better for habitat. And I believe that's the next slide that Dario's going to take over on. Next slide, please. There we
Right.
go.
Habitat is important, and everything is habitat, but what wildlife thrives on is mosaics of patchiness, different types of vegetation, like in this picture. So you've got quite a mix of different types. You've got some thick forest, some open forest, you got grass and shrubs and a little bit of water. There's some snags. So all of these features really enhance the wildlife habitat. One of the really important things is what we call ecotones. There's the edges of habitats. So along the edge of the forest, a lot of birds like to forage right on the edge. A lot of mammals will kind of work the edges. Some things like to be out in the wide open. So if you've got this mosaic of different vegetation types, this patchiness, that's the best habitat. And then here we also see some snags, the standing dead trees that woodpeckers use. Other birds will follow it and use the cavities that the woodpeckers create. There's a lot of insects in those snags that animals forage on. They can provide homes for some of the mammals, like the Douglas squirrels and even in the high elevations, the pine martens will live up in cavities. Also, it just kind of matches what Joanne was talking about, the patchiness. If you can imagine a fire burning through that forest in the back and it's heading toward us, before it even gets to where that deer is, it's going to be on the ground, just kind of creeping around. The wind might be pushing it, but it's going to affect the way fire burns across a landscape. So individual areas might torch off, but that would slow the progression of the fire on that part of the fire. So it would not make big, long runs of crown fire. So it's all contributing to diversity, and this is what we want to try to create. And you see a lot of times we'll have forest and maybe a clump of trees will die, or they'll have an open grassy area and they plant more trees in there. And we really shouldn't do that. We should try to enhance the diversity by maintaining or creating some open areas. And one thing, if you're creating open areas, you just have to be careful with invasive plants like Scotch broom and star thistle. There's a lot of native plants for sale from the Native Plant Society. You can get those established. But any way you can open things up, create this patchiness, is really going to enhance habitat. And you'll see a lot more variety of animals using it. Next. So winter. The question is, why do we want to evaluate our forests in the winter or do work on them in the winter? And there are many reasons. And one is you can see better because the deciduous trees have lost their leaves. You can see up into the canopy of the forest. You can see more detail. The other thing is it's cooler and it's safer and more comfortable to run equipment and get work done. We can do burning at that time of the year. If you wait till summer to do this, it's just too hot and it's too dangerous and you can't burn. So the material just sits there through the rest of the fire season. So it's a really good time to take the time to just evaluate what needs to be done and get going on it. And my Firewise community, Lower Colfax, we do most of our community fuel reduction projects in January, February, and early March because people will just show up and help because it's just a lot more comfortable.
Thank you, Dario. Thank you, Joanne. Before we get to the questions and the open discussion, I just want to talk briefly about what's next. And for those of you who just may have joined us a bit late, the core concepts were delivered by Dario Davidson and Joanne Feitz Kaufman, our forester and fire scientist. And I'm Kristen Cook with the You Bet Firewise community. So this journey we're on, living here in Nevada County and taking personal responsibility for kind of stewarding our land. Tonight was about the tree's eye view, which is learning how to observe and what conditions we're striving for. But we have working with the coalition, a variety of programs that we're going to share. But I think from my perspective, you know, my journey, I had no background as forestry or fire or anything like that when I moved here 9 years ago and started Firewise Community, you bet, 8 years ago. What I look at is on the left in my community, it looks like this. And what I've come to realize, again, with help from Joanne, Dario, and others in the community, is that if that fire comes through my community now, most likely what we will be left with is the forest on the left. It's a terrifying proposition. And so my personal mission and why I'm involved with the Wildfire Ready Coalition is because I want to see us collectively envision a better future and one that our trees can survive and be healthy and our homes can survive. So that's why I'm personally involved in this. Recently, Joanne did a guided tour up to Butte County, and we had the opportunity to see some of the devastation from the fires, the recent fires up there. And that picture here, the graphic here on the left with the burned out trees, went on for endless miles, just endless miles. And so, I think part of what I'm looking at here is how do we learn what forest health is, not just to survive wildfire, but to make our trees healthy and less stressed as well. One of these handouts we'll be sharing with everyone here on the Zoom call this evening and will be available on the website as well is a myth versus reality. And I think this sums up a lot of what we've heard, the questions I opened with in terms of the questions I hear from residents and my neighbors are, reasons why they don't want to thin their forests or what they think a natural forest looks like. I mean, we've all gotten used to these thick growths of trees, and we think that's the way it's supposed to be. So the reality is that the dense trees are not helping. They're hurting not only the habitat like Dario talked about, but they're hurting the trees themselves. And so my concepts that I walked away with are things like diversity and spacing and, appropriate thinning. And, I love the fact that, the more work I've done on my property, the more deer I actually see. So we'll be sharing this as a handout, and we're hoping that those of you who are on the call tonight will help evangelize this. We're asking people to help with this movement and make Nevada County a safer place. So we're creating tools which will be available on the Wildfire Ready Coalition website that we are asking you guys to download and share with your neighbors, and if you're a FireWise leader, to share with them. So this is just one of those that will be on the forest health section of the website. So when it comes to each of us individually, we have the opportunity going through this learning process is to understand now and walk our own properties and look at the conditions of the trees on our property, whether you're a half acre or 100 acres. There's definitely ways to now look up and see if you have canopy, see if you've got the lower limbs on an old oak tree that perhaps need to come down, and prioritize it. And so the idea here is to empower each of us to be able to make some of those decisions ourselves and feel like we can take action and we know what to do. But we're not stopping here. There's more. Some of you may have heard about our concept. We're doing winter walks, and we're inviting residents in Nevada County to join a winter walk. We have them scheduled. Joanne and Dario for this evening, our fire scientists and foresters, are leading walks, but we also have walks being led by Jeff Lauder, who heads up Sierra Streams Institute. Dylan, who is with the Truckee Fire Protection District, will be leading a walk on the east side. We have Alex Garretts, who's an RPF with the Nevada County Office of Emergency Services, and Zeno Acton, who's a certified arborist and very passionate about trees. And Catherine Benedict, who's another RPF, will be joining Joanne. So we have a lot of winter walks, and the idea here is that everything we talked about tonight on the Trees Eye View, we will have the opportunity to now go into a forest or a park, and one of these experts will help us get hands-on with looking and feeling what we learned tonight. It's not mandatory that anybody goes through the Trees Eye View. Anyone can join the winter walks, and we hope that you will bring friends. Just think of it as a nice day out. The QR code on the left is for the signups, but you can always go to the coalition website and sign up there as well.
Yeah, and the winter walks are going to be a great opportunity because you'll get to be right in the forest, and it'll be more one-on-one. It's just going to be really a fun thing, and there's so many different ones to choose from. They'll each be in a little bit different vegetation type.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dario. Yeah, go ahead, Joanne.
I was just going to say there's some great questions in the chat that I've been trying to answer, but those are questions that are not simple, and you'll get them answered in a much better context when you're out in the forest, and the person leading it can say, well, this tree would be one-eyed thin or not, and here's why. So it's hard to answer it just with some words. Out in the forest, it's much easier to understand and explain.
Thanks to both of you guys. And I'm personally excited by this because, as much as I've learned in the 8 years of doing, wildfire mitigation and FireWise community leadership, I still struggle when I literally walk my own property with making those decisions. So for me, I will be going out on the first one with Jeff to help, steer the program. I know we've already had open signups, and the couple of the dates are half full already. So it is something that we're seeing people sign up for across the county already. So it's super exciting. But in addition to the learning aspect, the coalition has quite a few programs that help us act. So when it comes to taking actions, one of the most important is the idea around how to properly burn, whether it's a burn pile or, as Dario does, prescribed fire. And so the coalition does have a safe pile burning workshop coming up on February 7th. I especially, I saw the sign up list too. If my neighbors are already signed up for that, we have a lot of folks here who are not comfortable with fire, not comfortable with how to do it. And this is a great opportunity to encourage your neighbors who maybe smoke you out and don't burn good, or just have never burned ever, right, to come to these safe pal burnings. So winter tells the truth. As Dario said, it's a good time to look around, look up, and see what needs to be done. And the purpose of this evening was to help you understand what to look for. I see we do have quite a few questions in the chat. At this point, I'd like to open it up as well. If you have a question that you would like to have the team respond to, please take yourself off mute and we can have some open dialogue. And that way, perhaps we can get to some of the questions in the chat.
Yeah, I'll just answer some because there's a couple that have similarity. One of the themes that we have that it's going to happen next is, what do you do about the situation? So pile burning's one. And then there was some questions in the chat. What if we, don't have the means to do the thinning ourselves? We do have some workshops planned on helping people plan and implement thinning or other projects, what grants and resources are available, et cetera. So we have that in the works.
Anybody on who would like to ask a question? And while that's happening, I'm putting a couple of files in the chat, which if you're too excited and you don't want to wait and go to the coalition website, you can download them from here. I see some familiar names out there. Anyone want to take themselves off mute and ask a question?
Well, I'll answer one that's on here that's a really good question. How can we better our communication with those of the age group whom feel the approach of the outside is invasive and are also homebound and cannot go on these informative walks? Well, that's a really great question. So we try to use as many different approaches as possible, and we're going to record this. But one of the most effective things is neighbors talking to neighbors. And some of the handouts we have or the materials we have on Facebook, maybe you can share them with your neighbors. So, I don't have the answers to all that. I don't think anybody does. But the more you learn yourself and can talk to your neighbors, I think that helps.
Totally agree. That's the whole kind of concept around Firewise, is neighbors helping neighbors. Hey, Rick, I see the invite for Feb 7 burning. Yeah, that's on the website as well. I can forward that to you, or you can click the link in the chat for the wildfirereadync.org is the link to the safe pile burning. And thanks for joining, Ricky. So happy to see you on there. All right. Well, I will just want to say super thank you to you guys for joining A Tree's Eye View this evening. It's been a little bit of a labor of love and a passion to get this out there, and really appreciate you guys sharing it out with your neighbors and your friends. We will be posting the recording of this workshop, and from there you can just, send links to folks, forward it, and make sure that we're start this collective movement around understanding what a healthy forest looks like. So with that, I especially want to thank Joanne and Dario for being our subject matter experts, and as always, sharing your knowledge so generously. And I'll stay on a little bit, but that concludes this evening's event.